For this video, I'll be walking you through how to create a custom date picker using object-oriented programming and web components, along with a lot of tricks in handling and manipulating dates with accessibility and multiple language support built in. Support the channel by liking or commenting on this video. Subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. Now, let's dive in. As in any object-oriented programming program, the first thing you need to figure out is the data and how the data flows. And a calendar has a lot of data and a lot of details when it comes to manage it. And ideally, you want something that it is easy to make sense of and maintain. It needs to be fast and memory efficient as well at times. So let's analyze this. Whenever we are talking about a calendar or a date, we think mostly about three things: the day, the month, and the year. But interesting enough, if someone asks you what day it is, as for a specific day, you often refer to the month and the year as well, like January 1st, 2021. And you can also mention a day of the week, like Wednesday 23rd, for example. You almost never talk about the day as being the date alone. You may want to know about the week, month, and year altogether. So a day has the most details to think about. If someone asks you what month it is, you may just say it is March. And we often curious to know how many days is there in a month. Also, when was or will be the first or the last day of the month. If you pay bi-weekly, you may be interested in the number of weeks in a month, just so you know how many times you get paid in a month. And it is hard to avoid talking about a month without mentioning the day, like telling people your birthday or specific special date in a calendar. So month already includes the day details. If I ask you what year it is, you probably just tell me it's 2021. Another important thing to know about the year is if it is a leap year, especially if you are born February 29th. You may need to know about the current month, which already connects the year with the month data. And often enough, you are interested to know the current day, which is the whole reason to look at the calendar, right? And that ties year to day data as well. By looking at this, we know that the day has the most details and it is the smaller piece of the data. The month includes the date and year includes month data, and we could use inheritance, but I think composition could make more sense for this system. So let's translate all this into data or objects since we are doing object-oriented programming. This is a super JavaScript heavy project, and the cool thing is that because it is web components, you can copy this straight inside your React, Angular, or Vue, or Svelte project, and it works just fine. Empty JavaScript for now, and not much in HTML, but I'll come back to this in a minute. In the CSS side, I have a simple body style to center anything, and as always, I box size border box everything. I am going to start by creating our day class, the smallest units of the calendar. It takes a date and a language to initialize, where date is null by default and language is default by default. Default means whatever the browser language is. Inside, I'll use the null coalescence to check if date is null or undefined, otherwise initialize a new date, which by default will be the today's date. Then I'll store it in a date with capital D. Now I get the day of the month. Then let's initialize to take a better look at it. And we can see that today is the 7th. Let's get the day of the week, which is the first reason to include the language information here. We get the local string passing the lang and specify the object. And for this, I only need the weekday with the long format. In the logs now, we see that it is Sunday. If I initialize the day with different language like PT for Portuguese, we can see the power of JavaScript built-in date object, which use the Intel API to work, which you interact with through the locale string, passing the options. I can specify ZH for Chinese. I also want the day as the number, and days are number 0 through 6, where 0 is Sunday. So I'll add 1 to it, so Sunday is 1 as the first day of the week. Different calendar has different first days of the week, and you can actually specify the type of calendar you want, which makes building calendar even more complex if you head in that direction. But I'll stick to the defaults here and make it simple. I also want a short version of the day of the week using short format now, and we see sun in the logs. Now I get the year with the get full year, and I also want the short version of the year using the local string with 2-digit year format. but I need to transform it into a number which you may not want, so feel free to remove this. Now, same thing for the month using a long format as well, and we see February in the logs. Similarly, we need a short version as well. I also include a timestamp, which can be great to extend this and handle a time of the year as well, but we don't care about the time of the day for this object. One piece of information I would like to include is which week of the year this day is, and that's a little more work. I'll create a get week number function for that. It takes a date, and the first thing I need to know is what is the first day of the year, which I create a date passing the year of the past date with 0 for January and 1 for the first day of the month. Next, I need to know how many days has passed from the first day of the year and the date passed to this function. And it is a simple subtraction that is done with days in milliseconds. And because this is in milliseconds and I need the day, I need to divide this by a day in milliseconds, which is 86,400,000 milliseconds. Now I return this week number, rounding it up, and it is a number of days plus the number of days past this week, call get day and adding it 1 since it is 0 based. And I'll divide it all that by the number of days in the week, which is 7. And that gives me the number of week in the year the past date is at. If I use this as set week in the day class, we can see that this is the 7th week of the year. One cool information to know about a day is if it is today, and for that I'll create a is equal to method that takes a date, and date can be a day instance or a normal JavaScript date, and all I need to compare is if the day, month, and year matches the date. Now from isToDate getter, I'll call it with a today's date returning the result. Another cool thing to include is a way to format the date of the day in whatever way you want, and this can be very extensive formatting method, but let me show you a very small version of it. You can also access the date in the object, which is we use the capital D for, and there's many methods you can use to format, and you can also use the Intel API to format this date in whatever you want. It takes a formatting string. It may look like this, where all I am asking is the month, day, and year. What the format returns is a string, which I call replace, and some regex to replace those uppercase letters with the actual date details requested. The regex is simple. I use a word boundary for full year, which is 4 Y letters, and I'll replace it with the year. We can see the logs now show 2021 instead of the 4 Y letters. If it is 3 Y letters, I'll replace it with the short year and we see 21. Now, if it is 2 W letters, that is the week, and I'll pad the week number with 0. If it is 1 W, I'll use the week as it is. If it is 4D, I use the day, 3D, the day short, 2D is a date padded with 0 up to 2 digits, and 1D is the date as it is. I'll copy days to create the month, and it is pretty much the similar thing, but for the month. It seems like I never created a month number property. You can also do DO for day to make it say like the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, for example, but I'll leave that as a homework for you to figure out. Make sure to subscribe and like this video to support the channel, by the way. I'll appreciate it. As you guess it, changing the language of the day changes the format as well. So this is how it looks for Portuguese. Now Chinese. With that, our day object is complete. So let's do the month now, which is even less detailed since the day already includes most of the work. It takes the same information to initialize, and the first thing I need to do is initialize the day. And I'll create this array of month sizes, which is the list of 12 numbers, one for each month of the year. And these numbers represent how many days there is in each month. For February, we start with 28 and take care of the leap year in a little. I'm gonna use the date to populate month name, number, and the year details. Now for the number of days, I'm gonna use the month number -1 to make it 0 based. That way it matches the index of the array for the month. Now if the month is February, meaning the 2nd month of the year, I'll add 1 to it if it is a leap year and 0 if not. To know if year is a leap year, a year must be perfectly divisible by 100, and 400, otherwise it must be divisible by 4. Now let's instantiate the month class and print it, and we can see all information looking super cool. And this month has 28, and 2021 is not a leap year. Notice that this month has not a list of days. This is because if we decide to store the days object for every days of the month, and then with 12 months, it will take a lot of memory, and in my opinion, it's a waste of resource. I recently wrote an article about design patterns to improve your code base with, and yes, you should follow me on Medium or visit beforesemicolon.com for even more awesome articles I write. Things that are better in articles than in videos. One of the design patterns I mentioned was an iterator pattern, and what I want is for this month class to be iterable, and I'll use the symbol iterator as key in this class and assign it to a generator function, and inside I'll initialize the number of 1, and this number represents the day in the month, and then I'll yield it by getting the day for it. This getDate takes the day of the month you want and returns a new day instance using the month information. While the number is less than the number of days in this month, I'll continue to yield new days and incrementing number. What this iterator allows me to do is spread month like this, and we can check the logs and see all the days of the month as day instances. I can also use a for loop to iterate over the month and print the days, and we can now see the days. So why do this? Well, instead of creating all these days and storing an array in the month to take memory, the iterator will create the day you want when you request it. So as I'm looping, I am requesting a day, and that's what I yield. That way, the month object stays small. You can use it in for loops, spread it, and transform into an array. And whenever you want a specific day, you call the getDay method. The way I change month into an array is by passing it to an array from method call, or simply spreading it inside an array like this. That completes the month class, so let's go for the year, which is even more simple and small. I'm not gonna call it year. I could create a year class and then create a calendar class which inherits from the year class, which is more flexible and actually better. The calendar takes year and month number as well as the language to initialize. Note that I refer to month number as month that starts from 1 as opposed to built-in date month that starts from 0 for January. The first thing we need to know is what day it is in the calendar, which is stored in today. We store the year or use today's year. For month, I'll initialize the month for it using the current info, and I'll have to subtract 1 from month number because it is not 0 based. This month indicates the current month in the calendar, by the way. I'll also make the year iterable as well by copying the month iterator setup, but it needs to get the month instead of the day. And we know that there are 12 months in the year, so the getMonth returns a new month instance using the calendar info. We can initialize it and look at it. One thing a calendar has, it is the information regarding the days of the week, which are 7, and we cannot hard code it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc., because that would break the language of the calendar. We cannot say Monday in a Spanish calendar, so we need that translated for us. So for each weekday, I'll get a day. I get the day, and if the weekdays does not include the day, I'll use the day number -1 to serve it as an index, then set the day as value, and the day would be already in the right language. If you start from any day and count 7 days, you will always go through all the days of the week, Monday through Sunday, and the index will make sure the days are ordered correctly from Sunday to Saturday. Now we see the weekdays list with the days already translated. I can change the language so you can see that it will change according to the language. Let's also add a getter to the calendar, whether it is a leap year or not. I can also iterate the year to get each month as well, since it is iterable. The calendar is pretty much done, but in order to support our date picker, I need to include some methods that let me navigate the calendar. I'm gonna add methods to get previous and next month, as well as one to let us go to a specific date. To go to previous month, we need to check if the current month is January 1st. Otherwise, we just return the new month instance using calendar info, but subtract 2 from the month number. One to make it 0 based and another to grab the month before. If the current month is January, we just go to December of previous year. Very similar to the next month. If it is December, we go to the January of the next year to grab the next month. To go to a specific date method takes a month number and year and simply reassigning month to the next month instance using the date provided, and we also need to update the date, the year as well. I'll also create a go to next and previous year method, which for next year we start from January, and to go to previous year we start from December. Similarly, I'll include go to next and previous month, which are very similar to get previous and next month, only that it updates the month object of the calendar instead of returning it. And like that, our calendar is complete and ready for our date picker web component. We start with a date picker class that extends native HTML element object. Then we use it to register our custom HTML tag for it, and we can also proceed to add it to the HTML as well. Here is how I picture it being used. It can take a string format to use. It can also take a date string. Another cool option is the position of the dropdown, which can be top, right, bottom, or left. And finally, whether it should be visible or not. I will also create these properties inside the class as well with some defaults. To initialize it, we first must call super since we are extending something. And the way to get the language to use, we will grab the navigator language, which is the language of the browser. Depending on the language of your browser, when you check the source code link, the date picker will be in the language of your preferences. Let me know if that's not the case. Next, we need our date, which I'll use the attribute for it. Then I'll attach the shadow DOM get reference for it. I'll use the date to create our day and also instantiate our calendar using the date information and passing the language as well. Now we must look for these attributes we set. If there is a format attribute, we use it, otherwise the default. For position, I'll expose a static position getter, which returns the position options this supports. Then use it to check if the position provided is, if it is a valid one, then use it, otherwise fall back to default. For the visible attribute, I'm expecting to be a Boolean attribute. By the way, you should check my article on HTML best practices. You can just add the attribute to the element with no value, and that would count as true. Or you can use the true string, otherwise anything will count as false, and I'll use the default for it. Next, I'll call a render method, which I'll add next. We will only render once, which is best to have DOM changes to a minimum. I'll have a style getter as well. The render simply sets inner HTML on the shadow root with the style roots inside the style tag. And for now, just a simple button of a class of date toggle, which for the label, I'll use the date and format provided to get a formatted date string for the button. Now, if we look, we shall see the button with the date and the format we set in the attributes. To make it look good, I'll paste some style. I'll target the host, meaning the date picker tag, and set position relatives and sans serif fonts. Then a style for the button with some padding, some stuff to reset it, dark text, light background, rounded corner, bolded, capitalized text, and pointer cursor. Now let's use one of the web component lifecycle. This is equivalent to React component did mount or Angular on init method. I'll use it to set mounted to true, which I'll show you why in a little. Now I need to grab the toggle button and attach a click event to it. Which I simply call a method to toggle the calendar. This method takes an optional visible flag, which is null by default, but I'll first add the thing we are toggling, which is the div that will contain the date to pick from. Which if visible, I'll attach the visible class, and I'll also use the position to set a class as well. I'll also grab the calendar drop-down element as well. Now if visible is null, it means that I need to toggle the visibility. So I'll toggle the visible class in the drop-down. Otherwise, if it is true or false, which means I need to set it to visible or not. Then I'll update the visible property based on the fact that the dropdown has the visible class or not. Now I need to set the style where the dropdown is not displayed unless it has the visible class. If I click on the toggle, now we shall see it show and hide. I need to position the dropdown absolute to get rid of the shift. Let's style this dropdown. First, we need the heading, which should contain the month of the year. Now we can add our head, which contains a left and right button with a title in the middle where I'll place our month, year string. Note that the button have no text, so I added an ARIA label with the label for our button, which screen readers can read. I'll also make the dropdown always visible so we can style it. I'll paste some style for the dropdown, but I'll exclude the height for now. For the header, I'll display flex it to get everything in line and align things vertically, space between so the arrows go to the edges. Some margin as well to separate it from the rest of the content. For the title, no margin, 21 pixel size, bold and capitalize. For the arrows, I'll use the border trick to create triangle shape, which consisted of 8 pixels transparent border, 0 width and height, where I only add color for the one border. They are both pointing to the left, so I'll rotate the right button to make it point to the right. They are still too small, so I'll extend click area of the button with the after pseudo element trick. I have wrote articles with many CSS tricks, including these ones you can check in a link below. I'll set a background so you can see how big these buttons are, and the header is ready now. I'll need to grab the heading tag as well, which I call date element. I'll actually grab the left and right button along with the heading as well. We need to attach a click event to these buttons, which call the next and prev month methods. I'll use the go to previous and next month method from the calendar to navigate. If we try this, the calendar is working, but we are not handling the calendar updates at the DOM level yet. So I'll add an update header text method, which simply updates the date element text content with the same string strategy we used before in the render function, and we need to call this function from the next and prev month functions. Now when I click the buttons, we see the month and the year change. One thing we need to handle is when users click out, and we need to listen to a click event on a document. And if the calendar is visible, we will call the toggle calendar with false. And we also need to hide it if the event target is different than the date picker element. Another issue is that if I navigate through the month and click to close it, it stays on the month I left when I open it. The ideal behavior is for it to open always on the month of the date in the toggle button. So I'll create a function that returns whether the current date is the same as the calendar date. Now when we click out, if it is not the current calendar month, we make the calendar go back to the current date, then update the header text as well. Now we need to render the days of the week, and the calendar already has that for this. So I'll create this weekdays div, which the static content will be the result from calling the get weekdays element strings. Inside, I'll simply map the calendar weekdays, returning a string of span tags with a weekday name, but I'll substring it to get only the first 3 characters, and I'll join it so we actually return a string and not an array of span tag strings. Now we have our weekdays set, so let's style this by making the weekdays div a display grid with 7 columns and gap of 5 pixels in between with some bottom margin to distance it from the days we will add later. For the weekdays span tags, I'll make them display flex with tags vertically and horizontally centered with 10 pixel size and capitalize. Now the weekdays look ready for the days. For this, we need to think a little because we need to figure out data first. I want to take advantage of the CSS grid and let that render, so I'll create an array containing all the days to render. But in a month, the first days of the month does not always start on Sunday, so we need to ignore the previous month end days and start from the day of the week the current month starts. In this get month dates grid, I'll first need to know the first day of the month. Now I need to know for the week of the first day of the month how many of those days belong to the previous month. And for that is simply checking the day number minus 1, because the day number returns a day of the week starting from Sunday, where Sunday is 1. Now if I create an array of those amount of days and then call this function from the connected callback, we can see that we create an array of 5 items, which means that the first day of the January fell on a Friday, and these 5 days belong to the previous month. Now we need to know how many days are in this month, and we use the number of days for that. Then we added the month array length. If we check the logs and I resize this so it mimics 7 columns in the calendar, this will be the final days of December, and the rest, the days of January, which is the current month we are seeing. Now let's populate those days with the date instances. And I'll for loop it starting from the total last month final days. And while I is less than the days in the month list, I get a day and set that index, and we have to subtract total last month final days, so we start from 1. In the logs, we see the undefined, then the days for this month. And I'll return this month list. I'll create another function to handle rendering these days, and I'll also get a reference of the container where I'll render the days. Now, in the function, the first thing I'll do is empty it and then loop over the month days create array, where I'll create a button and append it to the container. Also give it a class. And if there is a day, I'll use the date to set the button content. If we look to drop down now, we see the days, but they need to be styled. For the month days container, I'll make it a grid of 7 columns as well, similarly to the weekdays. By the way, this doesn't have to be the grid or this divs and span tags. You could also use a table element to do this, which will not require me to do any of these. But I prefer to use this instead of tables. And now for the days button, a nice bluish gray display flags with the number vertical and horizontally centered, but I'll actually hide it for now. And I'll first check if the day is the current day of the month and set the class of current, which now I can use to display it, but opacity is better than display, otherwise the buttons don't render. Now it looks nice, and I can give it dark background and a nice green on hover. Perfect. Now I need to highlight the current select date, which I'll create a isSelectedDate function, which compares the given date to the current date. If it is current date, I'll add the class of selected and give it a different background as well. Now when I click the arrow, the days are not changing, so I'll also have to call this in the navigation button handlers too. Now I navigate, it changes accordingly too. Very nice. And our calendar is pretty much ready. I don't know about you, but I like to know how the previous month ended by looking at the current month sometimes. So what I'll do is replace those undefined in array with the previous month final days too. First, I need to get the previous month, which we have a method for. Now we loop for just those amount of days, and I'll log to see it for now. We know that the index increases 0 to 4 and the number of days is 5. If I subtract I from the number of days, we see the final days of the previous month. If I use that to get a day and look at the calendar, but we need to show those days now, so normal opacity, we can see that it filled those days but not in the order we want, so we have to flip it. There are many ways to go about it, so what I'll do is create a constant for the number we will use to subtract it, and will be the first day of the week minus I plus 2 because number of day is not 0 based. Now the days is inverted as we want. I think we can use the total last month final days instead and subtract 1 as well. It works the same way. I'll create a method to contain all the methods needed to be called to update the calendar, and I'll call it render calendar instead and use it everywhere. Also, we don't need to check if there is a day because there's always going to be a day for the calendar to render. Now we need to be able to click a day and select it as the date we want. So I'll attach a click event that calls a yet to exist select date function. We could add this listener only to the days of the current month, but it does not hurt. So this function takes the element and the day. I'll also want to keep track of the button element, which contains the current day. Then set it here if it is selected day. Now when the selected day is called, I'll first check if it is the same date that is currently selected and quit early. No need to react to that. I'll update the date with the day passed. Now if the month of the day passed is not the same as the current month, we know the user clicked the last days of the last month, so we just go to previous month. Otherwise, I'll have to remove the selected class from the current button day element, then add it to this current clicked button and set it as the selected day element. At the end, we just toggle the counter, which will cause it to close. When we try, it works great. The toggle button text does not get updated, so I'll create a new function for that and I'll call it after we close dropdown. All it does is set a new text content using the updated date and format. As I navigate, notice that the calendar shrinks and grows depending on the number of days in the month. So we need to have a fixed height for the drop down. Now the calendar internal functionality and the style is complete, but we have all these attributes and we are not reacting to them if they change. And we also haven't done anything with the position attribute. One nice thing is that you can use the keyboard to open the picker. You tab around, pressing the return key to navigate the months. If I turn on voiceover while I navigate to simulate someone trying to use it with a screen reader technology.
Now in append by before semicolon banner, January 20th, Wednesday, 2021, button. You are currently on a selected tab previous month button. You are currently on a selected next month button. You are currently on a selected tab inside of a group 31 button.
It correctly announced the date and navigation buttons. For the days of the month though, it does not quite say the date and we need to fix that. To fix it, we simply need to add an area label for it with the date formatted. I'll also add a tab index in the title so we can tab it too, and I'll provide a phrase for it with the date formatted to say. I'll also set this on the header when things change as well. Now if I try to navigate with the keyboard and the voiceover on, you can see that it announces the toggle button date correctly. And when I open it, it jumps to the tab header and announces the current month and the year. And the buttons say the full date for it as well. What would be nice is when I toggle off the drop down to move the focus back to the toggle button. The inverse will be focus on the header too when we opened. I can also focus back on the header so when I go next to previous month, it announces the month and year as well. Now with this easier to navigate, let's handle prop changes. This will be equivalent to reacting to props changes in React. For web components, the cool thing is we can tell it which props we care to react to by setting a static getter for observed attributes, and these are the props we will react to if it changes. That way, if you use this inside another component or in an Angular or React app, it will pick up the updates nicely. I recently shared a snippet on an article I wrote that lets you detect element changes regardless if it is a web component or not. So check that out. Now we need another web component lifecycle, which is attribute change callback, and it gets called with the name of attribute that changed and its old and new value every time there is a change. Now we get to use the is mounted boolean, and it is because when we first render the date picker on the DOM, this attribute change callback gets called. It will be a nice way to set the defaults initially, but we already did inside the constructor, which is better in my opinion. If the attribute change is the date, we need to use it to update the date and go to that date. update the calendar and toggle button, and that's it. Now, if I inspect element and change the value of the date, we see the toggle date change, so the calendar drop down as well. Super cool. I'll use the switch statement for this instead. Now for the format, we only need to update the format property and the toggle button text. For visible, we use the same strategy we did in the constructor with some minor changes, then we call the toggle function. Finally, for position, we use similar strategy as in the constructor and update the class of the drop-down element. To see this, we need to handle that in the style, where I add a style for the different positions and try it out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like this video to support the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on anything. Once again, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.